let's start from the beginning of the question. If we do, I'm going to take a step beyond it, if we have comprehensive immigration reform, and you look at the numbers, by definition, a lot of these facilities will go down. Secondly, you're absolutely right. I've never gotten pressure from a private jail, but I have from counties, from areas which I represented as a congressman that called me and said, hey, ICE is thinking about closing, not using us. That would mean millions of dollars of revenue that we get, which would be a shortfall to the county budget, which would mean I have to increase taxes to people who live in your district. So clearly when you do all these things, you have to balance them out, right? But there is no question that there will be countervailing revenue produced as people prepare in a process of legalization, right? People will need their criminal records and have to pay for that, and they'll need all sorts of documentation which local facilities are charged for. But the fact that county facilities make money doesn't really bother me as much because it's part of the system. I am bothered for profit when it comes to human freedom. There are things that I believe, and I'm not going to enumerate them because my opponents will run them on TV, but there are clear things that are within the jurisdiction of the state. Policing authority, human liberty is within the jurisdiction that cannot be subcontracted. There's a lot of things that I think you can do privately, or at least test privately. But I'm not a believer that human liberty should be one of those.
Okay. Can I follow up, Jonathan, just a little bit?
Yes.
Would you favor the ICE is the bed 34,000 bed count?
Is
The
it
only
so?
law. Okay, so you would sponsor, be a part of, get rid of that then?
Right.
Thank you.
Always understand that part of what the grain of truth that motivated that is simply preparedness as opposed to a means of profit. One thing is that I say you got to have a 4-lane highway because a lot of traffic is coming through here. It's quite another thing if I build a 4-lane highway into nowhere, which is what we're talking about here, right? This idea that our policing authority is used to keep beds full as opposed to what we need to be effective and efficient.
I think the only other question I would have then is are you currently accepting it, or have you accepted it?
I have not currently accepted. I don't know if in the past I might have, but
Yes, you did.
But
But I'm not worried about the past, I'm worried about right now. So you're saying from now on that won't happen?
no, it's not happening. But it is something that we have to look at. By the way, not only in this little space, but we have to look at it in jails broadly. And I think there are all sorts of ways that you can reshuffle this so that it is not damaging to anyone, right? Because somebody's bull always gets gored, and I'm not worried about the private corporation.
Okay,
But there are these small cities where,
I understand where you're going.
yeah,
But are you philosophically or opposed to private prison corporations?
I am philosophically opposed to private prisons, corporations. Yeah, I find that that's a problem. But what I will tell you is, I am not philosophically opposed to finding ways to keep him out of jail so that he can still be productive. But that has to be monitored. Look, I served on the Florida Public Service Commission, right? We said there is a monopoly entity on electricity in Florida. But we created an institution that supervised the monopoly so it wouldn't abuse. And in cases like this, where you are controlling someone's liberty, the government has to be part of it because the abuse is direct on a person's human rights. And that's very different. It has to be a much higher standard of scrutiny when you're going to even consider it. But if I can find a more inexpensive way to make sure that instead of having someone wait in a jail 6 months before their hearing date, I can find a way that he's on the street, not costing us money, and not a slave to some private company. And there's somebody who can do it better than the government. Well, let's look at it. That doesn't sound like a good way to do it, right?
So you would move reporting from this private entity to ICE instead?
I would. The question I have, if ICE is monitoring, which is the underlying player here, why do we need another player in the middle? It may well be that we don't, but it's bureaucracy running amok.
Are you aware that Judge Ford is charging $40,000 bonds to do the release?
Now, I'm aware that the bonds are crazy to people who, in theory, have no way of sustaining that or making it. So it's basically an abuse of that authority. Because a bond is meant so that you don't run from the authority of the court, right? And so the fact that they would charge you so much, it makes no sense for someone who wants to. What they want is to stay here.
Well, I mean, I think there is a particular issue with that judge, in particular Judge Ford at BTC, whose bonds are outrageous, and his treatment of detainees is outrageous.
The only thing I would add is it goes beyond that individual. It goes to other judges there. It goes to other judges in Chrome. We just had an ethnic Somali man who happens to be a citizen of Kenya. Horrible situation. Actually found him attorney, found him resources, found him a place to stay, only to have the judge say $20,000. You know, and it's not just that one.
Forgive me for my ignorance here. What exactly is the purpose of the bond, that the person won't run?
It's to ensure that they're not going to be a flight risk or.
Flight risk, even though they're deportable, because or for a criminal case.
For
that's pending?
asylum.
Strictly asylum.
Strictly asylum.
Yeah, nobody's in detention doing any kind of criminal, time, you know that. They're there getting their detention.
Correct.
Civil detention.
And they're putting them on the GPS monitor, so it seems like a double do there, because if you have the GPS monitor, why is there a bond?
Right.
Right.
That makes sense.
That's great.
Makes sense.
We're going to go to Peggy Mustadi also from Friends of Miami-Dade Detainees, which is doing terrific work at Chrome Detention Center.
There are many instances in which ICE is unable to remove certain individuals because of complicated diplomatic relations and inability to obtain travel documents. The Supreme Court has held that ICE cannot indefinitely detain these individuals and instead must release them after a 6-month period if they cannot be removed. Similarly, the courts of appeals have held that immigrants should not be detained in a prolonged manner while the cases are pending, as some cases last for 3 or 4 years when there is judicial error. In both contexts, in instances of pending or final cases, individuals are regularly detained past the 6-month period and needlessly continue to languish in detention at taxpayer expense. If elected, and this is a 2-part question. Number 1, what efforts would you take to ensure that we as a nation do not indefinitely detain immigrants? Would you like me to ask the second one?
Yeah, maybe I can.
Number 2, in the case of detainees suffering from long-term mental illness, detention itself is inappropriate and represents additional concerns to protection of human rights and national mental health legislation. The problem is compounded by the inability or unwillingness to find appropriate placement when needed as a condition for release. Actually, I have a case example that we have to share first tonight. How would you propose managing individuals in long-term indefinite detention due to mental illness and concerns regarding appropriate placement? If I may just remind you, this is not a concern if they were American citizens in a regular prison.
Right.
And while I would understand the moral concerns or legal concerns, I would, well, legally not, but understand the concerns, it's definitely not parallel, it's not the law.
No, I get that, so I don't want to sound flippant either, but I come at immigration in a very different way, right? I believe it's a positive net gain for the country. But I also believe that there has to be certain standards when you apply immigration, and there are certain rules that have to, we've been just talking about one particular aspect of that, which dovetails into what you were talking about, right? Inevitably, what you're dealing with, unless people have committed criminal acts, which I want to be clear, we have to create a distinction for criminal acts, and we have to be harsh and draconian there. At the same time, I'm a believer that an immigration judge should have as much latitude as he would have under any circumstances to do what's in the best interest of the country, because I think a judge will do the right thing. So, once we get rid of the criminal aspect of it, and you're just dealing with people who have, to use your words, committed a civil act of a civil violation, then I think we have to look at it in terms of each case and figure out ways to make it viable. Whether, you know, the very fact that someone is here undocumented and has not accepted deportation, right? Because all of these people get offered to go back, right? And when they haven't accepted that and they are in our process, then we have to find a humane way to treat them so that it reduces our costs, so that it maximizes their productivity, and at the same time protects the integrity of the process so that it gets through. But to be more specific than that, I'd have to sit with you, and if you have solutions for it, it's part of what I was talking to Maria about in her question, is that we need to, all things have a lifespan, right? And we tend not to, we look at immigration, right? The basis, and you just need to look at it anew, and how do we make things work? In a modern world, our ability to understand what's going on, to affect people, movement across borders is very different than it was, say, 40 years ago, right, or 30 years ago, when immigration reform passed. And so I think it's important that we sort of take this on again from scratch and do things that make sense, right? It certainly makes no sense for me to say to you, I'm gonna keep you, I'm gonna put a bond on you, and I'm gonna track you, and I'm gonna charge you, and by the way, in the interim, you have no way of working to pay that, so right now I'm sucking from your family and pulling them into the hole with you, as opposed to saying, how do we deal with this, by the way, much more quickly than we do, right? Because the idea, justice delayed is justice denied, and it just makes it expensive. And at the same time, by having a process that maximizes everybody's input, I think it will go quicker once we deal with the sort of monster of a bigger problem we have.
I may just
Sure.
turn briefly to the issue of mental illness. Specifically, I'm looking at a very small subset that is significant. Majority, probably not all, but majority of Cubans commit a felony of violent crime of some kind. Newer multiple collection murder, for the record, but still, they have this crime. Upon completing their sentences, instead of being released, they go to criminal.
And they said, yeah.
One gentleman, 7 years later. And I wish it were that simple.
So let me address this.
With severe psychopathology with a staff that's
Yeah.
quite abusive at times.
Yeah, of course. No, and you're dealing with someone who is, look. So we have to deal with Cuba in a broader way. I'm a believer that we have to have a much more mature relationship in dealing with all these problems. And this is an offshoot of, Cuban Adjustment Act, immigration policy with Cuba, processing in the United States, how we deal with criminal aliens, how we deal with tourist visas in Cuba. And that can only happen if we begin to have a rational policy around it. And right now, we have the beginnings of a policy that I agree with, a policy that has parts like this which have to be negotiated and solved and have to make sense long term. Likewise, we also have to have a vision of the impact we cause, right? So there are, I'm trying to remember the number because I used to know it off the top of my head. There are tens of thousands of Cubans who are under deportation order in the United States for having committed crimes 2 and 3 decades ago, right? They are now grandparents, they are property owners, they are, in some cases, successful pillars of the community who just don't vote, right? Because they are, we have to have a serious relationship that the same way that we made, I think, in the case of El Salvador, right? We began this Salvadoran deportation program, and so we took LA gang members in huge amounts and dropped them in downtown San Salvador in a society that was just ending a civil war. And so what we created is a disaster that, of course, now we're getting the children of those kids here. So I think it's a much more systematic relationship that we have to have with the deporting country how to help that work out there, how they get received there, what's the treatment that's going to happen. Because we do it in other places very efficiently, but we have to have a serious relationship, because particularly you're talking about the ones that are detained that are costing us money right now, but there are tens of thousands of people who are under deportation orders who are fearful of deportation, and that creates all other, so we have to have a way, and that's one of the reasons that I talk about creating standards, but creating wide latitude for immigration judges, right? These ideas that me, sitting in the United States House of Representatives, can write a law that is gonna contemplate every little example. And what happens when you do this is the unintended consequence, right? We got rid of you being able to marry someone and legalize them. 98% of the cases are perfectly normal things, right? But we created this law when the Democrats passed a law that basically said if they caught you going out, it was still illegal, right? So what did you do? You just didn't leave and you brought your family. You only had, as opposed to the man, which usually was the worker, going back and forth. When he realized that he couldn't go out, he brought it. So that's why we have to have worker provisions that make sense. And when you have an immigration system that makes sense, you can deal with things like this. Because in today's world, this horrible little thing you're dealing with, it's so in the dark to the broader mass number of other things that are out.
So actually, I want to do a follow-up question and a couple of follow-up questions. One, I didn't hear a clear answer from you. Is there not something fundamentally immoral with holding a mentally ill person in detention for
Yes.
7 years in an inappropriate setting for that person,
Yes.
despite the violent crime that that person has committed?
Yes.
And if there are hundreds or maybe thousands, I don't know how many Cubans who are living in the community, reporting to ICE that they need to report regularly to ICE.
Believe it or not, most of them don't.
Most of them don't, but many of them do, because I've been there and I've seen them in line reporting ICE. So if
It's a small percentage that do.
but if
Believe it or not.
having committed crimes many years ago have since held productive lives, is there not, and you had mentioned something about that obviously if someone's committed a criminal crime, that's a whole nother category. But is there something wrong with the priority where someone who's had a DUI 10 years ago or 20 years ago has not had one since, they're still deporting those people?
And that's why I make the point that we have to give maximum discretion to judges to be able to deal with it on a case-by-case basis. I think we can create some basic standards, but I think when you're looking, I'll tell you about a case I know. A gentleman, 72 years old, he committed a crime in the early 80s. I'll let you guess what that was about. And he now he's put 3 kids through college, has 10 grandkids. He's retired at home. And I don't know, is it productive for our country to say, okay, let's turn the wheels of justice on this guy, or is it better to say, let's let him stand in front of a judge and let him look at this case? Likewise, I know that if a European commits a crime in the United States, there's no chance that he's ever going to stay here forever. We have a relationship with that country. We send him back. It gets dealt with. And I think that's part of how diplomacy is supposed to work. And we have to have, if we have this year we will hit 950,000 Cubans traveling, people traveling to Cuba from the United States and back and forth. If we have that, then we have to have a relationship with the Cubans to say, listen, we have to deal with these people, X, Y, and Z. This guy he wants to go back to his home country. How are you going to treat him? What are the conditions you're going to, by the way, we've done that for exigent circumstance. So I don't know, I'm sure you're aware of it. On Coast Guard cutters in the Florida Straits, there's a guy from ICE that sits there with all the Coast Guard guys, and every time they pick up rafters, they have an interview with them, and they get dropped back off. If we can have that relationship, we have to have a more serious relationship with the hundreds of thousands of people that are in this system.
Okay, I'm gonna, actually ask.
I think I've answered enough questions to make it almost impossible to me to win a general election, but I wanna thank you all.
No,
Okay.
Actually, I wanted to ask a question, is this a follow-up question, or is it?
It was a follow-up question.
Okay,
to
go
the
ahead,
6
Dana.
month
Yeah, go
detention.
ahead.
With regard to 6 months detention, a case recently just came out in the 11th Circuit, so-called the United States, I'm not sure if anyone knows it. It does outline factors of, with regard to detaining people after 6 months, and attorneys are being encouraged, and I encourage everyone to try to get